or should I say, hoot, hoot, hoot. That was pretty cheesy. This is Evan Matthews, co-founder of Macroverse, and we're back for another little, probably relatively short stream this evening, but I wanted to get back into this awesome Moonbird's commission for Dave Toronto. This bird, as you may remember, is called Lazerwing, not Laserbeak. And we left off in session 2 with this basic progress on the character. You can see the original Moonbird up here in the upper left-hand corner, which I'm just using as reference. The line work is done. We put in some flat colors. I talked last time a little bit about using reference for the wing to make sure that that felt right. Feeling pretty good about this character at this point. And now we're going to get into some shading and starting to kind of detail out some light and shadow and kind of getting more of the rendering in for this guy. I don't know how far I'm going to get this evening, but I wanted to squeeze a bit more progress in and share that with anyone that can tune in. I see Matt Maz, and I am excited for you to be able to tune in as well. Thanks for being here. Lots of exciting stuff going on in Macroverse in general right now. So watch for the first of what will be a bunch of announcements coming over the next week to 2 to 3. There's at least a couple of things that we know are for sure going to be announced over the next 2 to 3 weeks, with more throughout the summer. A lot of the things that we've been putting together over the last year, which feel to me like it's taken forever in some ways, those things are finally kind of all snapping into place now in a very good way, including a bunch of things that we didn't actually foresee that are also going to be very additive to everything we're building, and as importantly to the community as a whole. So very excited about all of that. But in the meantime, let's get back to Lazerwing. So a lot of you know, if you've seen some of the stuff I've been doing recently, I've been obsessed with using these kind of texture brushes that essentially simulate some of the idea of these kind of dot patterns that you might recognize from the idea of kind of classic comics or classic printing, lithography, dots on newsprint, printing on newsprint, those sorts of things, and not using them in the way that a lot of people have probably been familiar with using them, but actually using them more as a way to build up light and shadow and texture. I did a whole thing on a Nuclear Nerd around this, and then on a Bushido, and I've been doing this for a couple of years, kind of obsessed with this particular technique and refining it and kind of being able to use color combinations and texture combinations to create a particular style of rendering. So that's what we're going to do here as well, kind of keep going down this particular creative path. And I also talked about in the last session, I want to try to really stay true to this incarnation of Dave's Burb. And there's some subtlety in the color palette, which I want to bring through into the final art here, where we can't go overly light and shadow. We don't want to get too noir or too much contrast to kind of maintain some of the subtlety of the palette here. So I'm going to start with, and I'm sure going to end up tweaking a lot of this, but I'm going to start with the idea of kind of where's the light source. I'm imagining in the finish, maybe it will be over here, but I've been thinking we've had this kind of like shimmer or kind of glow from the visor on the left-hand side. And that the shadow is the light source is kind of upper left. So for the moment, I'm going to go with that idea. So you're going to have both light from upper left, and then also light from the kind of red glow of this visor as that comes into play. I've just got a version of one of these dot patterns, which you can see they kind of get kind of the dots get tighter together, so you can make different levels of essentially what will start to look like different tones or different shades, especially as they overlap. And I'm going to start with being somewhat delicate. I've just taken the background color as a starting point, I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller here and start to just figure out, how are we going to render out, the idea of this light source coming from the upper left. And so a lot of this, this is something I think I've actually gotten pretty good at over the course of my artistic journey, is light and shadow, and kind of imagining three-dimensional space as how light would hit an object, or in this case, an owl's head. How the overlaps will kind of cast shadows on things. These are all kind of being able to kind of perceive how this thing works in three-dimensional space. And so because this is also the lightest shade of this, and it probably won't stay blue, we'll play with some blending modes and maybe even adjust the color, but it's a good way to kind of bring the palette back into the drawing, to start with the background color and then kind of work it out from there. So I sometimes have a very concrete plan in place, but a lot of times I'm just doing exactly what I'm talking about, just deciding on essentially a light source, and then kind of building things out from there. Also, knowing that this is going to be the lightest part of the texture, I'm going to go a little bit into starting to carve out some of the highlights, what will be the lightest parts of things. And then I'll come back and be, hitting some of this more with, darker shadows along the way as well. I'm also going to keep it, again, kind of pretty monochromatic, but I'm going to keep working in a bunch of different layers so that I have a lot of control over how the finished thing comes together. I'm using less pressure on the Cintiq, which means that as you reduce the pressure, these brushes are pressure sensitive. So as I use less pressure, it makes the effect more subtle, and pressing harder makes it darker. So it's another thing that is kind of a tool in the toolbox here. So yeah, I'm gonna continue to just add a little bit in the more subtle side up into this part of the owl's horn, for lack of a better word. And then bringing this down here. So if there's light coming from here, most of the top of this visor, even though it's metallic, is going to be getting hit by that light. So we'll probably give a little bit of we don't want it to just be a flat color. That doesn't really make sense with the rest of what this is. So I'm going to add a little bit of shading to it. Again, kind of this subtlest tone. And then as we hit that corner, it's going to get darker. And then as we add more, obviously it'll get darker again. And then this part is actually going to be largely, there will be some light hitting it, but it's going to be largely not directly in the light source. So there will be a edge here that will help carve out the shape of that, but again, that'll kind of come in a second or a third or fourth or 10th pass, as the case may be. So I am actually on a multiply blending mode, which means that this will be darker than the just actual solid color. So if I went to normal, like this would be actually the exact color of the background, but on multiply, it's blending the background color into the color that's underneath it, which keeps the again, sort of brings the palette of the environment into the drawing, into the art, but it doesn't it's not I guess, what am I trying to say? It's creating the right type of kind of shadow or contrast, as opposed to being just that pure color. So light this way, we're going to have definitely the shadow of the beak. And then again, we'll start to imagine there, could be a little bit of a highlight there. So we'll actually leave that untextured. But then as we get to the bottom of the head, it's gonna kind of wrap around this spherical Moonbird semi-spherical shaped head. And then the head itself is also going to cast a shadow as it goes into the body. We'll have, again, sort of light hitting that shoulder, but then the rest of this largely being darker than the brightest part, which is going to be up here. I had talked a little bit about why the body part, the body shape of the bird was a darker gray. That's not going to stay that way. It'll end up getting adjusted, but it helps to make sure that I can easily tell the different pieces that I have in the color flats in those layers, so that this is a separate layer, the visor is a separate layer, the wing is a separate layer. So it helps me kind of see those differences at this stage as I'm potentially modifying some of those things as the progress continues. We'll also get some reflected light coming from the other side, but that tends to be one of the last things that I do. And then all of this under the wing and into the back, this is all going to be in shadow. Make this just a little bit smaller. So this process for me, you know, some people who I really respect are able to just kind of very quickly, comparatively very quickly, kind of go in and you're like, okay, this is this shade or color. This is exactly kind of this particular, you know, mix of colors to get the palette that we're after. And I have a sense of that, but for me, it's a lot more kind of, we'll try to be a little punny. It's a little more flying by the feathers of my wing, let's say, to just, you know, kind of pull it all together and, you know, kind of figure it out as I go along. So knowing enough about color theory and, you know, kind of the basics that, you know, how these things work, and having enough experience doing it, like that all gives me the confidence to be able to know that I'm going to be able to figure it out as we go. You know, it's like there's enough evidence that it's happened a bunch of times. But I don't always go in knowing exactly what I'm going to do. I have a starting point, and then I, you know, kind of figure it out as we go. For better or worse, that's actually been a lot of my career, is kind of having an idea and a thesis, and then just getting started and finding my way to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. So, you know, finding the next right step. So I'm doing a little bit of shading on these feathers. And I may come back and hit this with a little lighter, you know, I don't know. My words are not working as well as they sometimes do. I come back and hit it with additional light as it comes together. But right now I'm just focused on the shadow pass. So, you know, kind of really picking out highlights as well as the darkest parts of the shadow. Now, as these wings overlap, they're casting a shadow on to the ones, the feathers rather. They're casting a shadow onto what's below them. But then we also want to create a little bit of a feeling that they're dimensional to a degree themselves. So we're giving them a little bit of additional modeling here to suggest that. And then as we get, again, a little bit more towards this side, be a little less heavy-handed with the shading to suggest that there's more light here than there is over here. Starting to feel a little bit more dimensional. Yeah, what I love about this, I kind of accidentally found this particular technique. It's one of those things of wanting to play with, these kinds of textures again, kind of for the throwback of classic printing and comics and all that stuff. And then I kind of found this accidentally where I just started layering these things together and found that what I love about it is that when you see the finished piece, and I think this will be the case here as well, it feels like it's very rendered. It feels like it's very almost slightly painterly if you see it from a distance. But then when you get up close, it's just this amazing kind of textured, layered, kind of combination of colors and textures and overlays that, really bring the whole thing together. And so it's this kind of, approach that works, at least certainly for my taste, in, a couple of different ways, and just creates a much richer experience of the piece than going in a kind of more traditional flat rendering style, or even kind of a painted rendering style, which I've also done a good bit of both of those as well. But I feel like this is something that, I've kind of stumbled on that to a degree has kind of become my style. It's certainly the thing that I'm playing with the most over the past handful of years when it comes to doing these types of illustrations. And I think I mentioned this in the last session as well. When it comes to style in general, and I actually believe this is pretty true in art, in writing, in most forms of certainly creative communication, but probably in most forms of all communication. But I'll talk about art and specifically. A lot of us as younger artists, we want to find our style. We want to develop our style. We have this question of, what is my style? How do I find my style? Being someone that initially thought I was going to draw comics, that was a big topic of conversation in my era. All of the image founders, had a style. For example, you could very much tell a Todd McFarlane piece from a Eric Larson piece, from a Rob Liefeld piece, from a Jim Lee piece, and this kind of signature style. And so a lot of us, from that era, really, wanted that. We wanted that signature style, that unique, immediately recognizable, and let's be honest, kind of commercial, famous making, star making style. And what's funny is that, rightly so, a lot of where I started and where a lot of people start in that pursuit is actually copying those styles that we like, trying to, do that thing that someone that we like, does. And we might naively even think like, oh, if I could just do that person's style, like, because I love it so much, like, that will, I don't know. It's an interesting paradox, because it's then not really about finding your own style as much as, capturing this other thing that you like. And for me, that was Art Adams. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to draw exactly like Art Adams, as did a lot of people, including most of those image founders that I talked about. Say, Art Adams is probably the most influential comics artist, or certainly one of them, of the last decades, kind of from the 80s on, and definitely into the 90s and 2000s. Spending all that time copying, certainly learned a lot from doing that. One of the best ways to learn is to copy. I've heard some people talk about it as kind of doing a master study of someone's style. So if you can figure out how to make the marks that they make, you'll then ultimately, hopefully, figure out how to apply them in your own way, or in your own work. And so that, was certainly a starting point, and you kind of discover things along the way. And then another mentor of mine is an artist named Brian Stelfreeze, who is just phenomenal in his own right, just an illustrator's illustrator. When I went to art school, one of the things he said to me, and it wasn't directly related to style, but one of the things that he said to me was, put down all of the comics, work, and he's a professional comics artist. He's like, put that down. You're arguably at, one of the best art schools in the world. And, it's there for you when you get done, if you want to pick it back up. So like, just put that pursuit down, learn everything that you can learn, get all the skills that you can get, explore other avenues, stop being so laser focused on that one outcome. And if you ultimately decide that's what you want to do, again, it's there for you when you want it. And that was the best advice for me that I could have gotten, because I took that advice and I focused more on fundamentals and color theory and figure drawing and all the things that one does in that situation. And I ended up not drawing comics professionally. I have done a couple of comics, but it hasn't been the pursuit of my illustration and art career in that part of my career. Lots of other things. But what that did was it actually helped me find what I think is now essentially my style. And I now kind of give this advice that your style is actually something you can't find. It's actually just the natural point of view that you have on the world. And so I think I talked about this, maybe in one of the last sessions, but, if you need to draw a moonbird, or if you need to draw anything, this wing is a good example of that. Finding something real to understand how it works. I had to go find this reference for the wing to really understand kind of how it would work in this position, understanding the anatomy a little bit, making it feel believable in the context of this character and in the context of the illustration. That then the way you interpret that, your attempt at representing reality, that is actually your style. So, I often give the assignment in Tiny Universe, if you're listening, to draw 100 hands. It's always my kind of go-to example. If you can, master this thing in 3-dimensional space, you can just about draw anything. And by the time you finish drawing 100 hands, if you try to draw them somewhat realistically and really understand the anatomy and really understand how this machine works, if you go through that process, by the time you finish the 100th one, it's gonna be a good part of the journey towards your style, because you're trying to draw this thing realistically, but you're gonna have your own unique quirks, your own unique way of drawing it. And at the end of the day, that unique way of drawing it is your style. That's just your natural, unique interpretation of this thing that you're trying to represent in an artistic medium. And, same thing has been true for me as a writer, trying to find my voice, trying to find my style as a writer. I had to get to a point where I was just comfortable, willing, and able to, tell a story the way that I would naturally tell a story. And of course, you learn craft and you learn, the things that work and don't work, and get a lot of feedback along the way. And all those things are really important. But at the end of the day, the unique voices that we all respond to are delivering that voice uniquely because it is genuine and authentic to them. It's the way they see things. It's the way I see things in this case. The way that my particular quirks put a line down on paper, or in this case, on a digital screen. So I think it's really important, and I think it is very applicable beyond just art, the way we communicate with other people, the way that we present ourselves and our ambitions, that, if we're authentically ourselves and we're doing those things the way that only we can, I do believe that's where we have the biggest impact, whether it's drawing an awesome moonbird, or it's talking about, our latest project, or it's sharing, with a friend when we feel the most at ease, we're the most authentically ourselves. And that may take some practice to get comfortable with in all of those scenarios. But I think it makes the biggest difference for finding the rewards in every context of that word that we're all looking for. Thank you for attending my seminar. I will now put some shadow on this skull. So I've gone to another layer. I'm going to stick with the blue for the moment, and again, go to multiply. So again, less that this is going to be the final thing, but I just want to start to lay down these planes and kind of the rendering of these forms as much as I can. So again, thinking that the light source is coming from up here, I'm going to actually make my brush a little smaller, and I'm going to make our skull a little bigger to be able to get in here. This is one of the things that working digitally absolutely is uniquely able to do compared to working with traditional media. You cannot zoom in on a piece of paper, and sometimes that is a really nice and handy thing to be able to do. So continue to kind of imagine light coming in from the top there, and just putting in some of the planes, kind of dimensional planes that would be in shadow compared to that light source. And again, this is going to be the lightest part of it outside of the actual highlights and things that the light will be casting off. So we start to get to something like this as a starting point. Should probably be a little bit of additional shadow under this kind of parts of the eye socket. Sometimes these smaller things like the skull in the context of the illustration will actually make some of the biggest difference. And then on yet another layer, I want to keep my visor shadow on another layer as well, so that I have more control over that once again. I'm not yet getting into the glow or the sheen of the visor. Just again, more thinking about the light source. So again, we'll go to multiply, and you can see the effect of that blue in the multiply layer on the visor is much different, because again, we're blending here. So if we've got light coming from here, then this ridge is going to cast a shadow down onto the visor in this area. And the bottom part is going to be mostly open. I'll give just a little bit of a shadow at the bottom here as well. Just it'll make it feel slightly more dimensional as we get to that stage. And actually, just checking the Moonbird, I want to make sure that it is. Yeah, it does feel like it's slightly recessed. So the red part, as opposed to being flush with the goggles, we can see that little bit of a shadow line under there. So it makes it feel like it is slightly recessed as opposed to being flush. So we'll go with that, which leans into this kind of darker line here as also helping to communicate that being that slightly more recessed approach. Okay, so subtle, but there's our kind of first layer of shadow and rendering for that shadow. So now I may, and I probably will, play with this a lot more, but I'm just going to kind of flip through some blending modes. So you can see even going to a subtract mode. Funny enough, it's like, even though that's made the shadow feel it's a little more it's warmer, it's a little brownish, a little reddish. I'm not going to stay there because I want to, again, kind of stay in this cool monochromatic color palette. But you can see that it feels a little more, it feels harmonious with the background. You would never know that I used that background color to create that reddish, brownish, purplish tone. But because I did, it creates more color harmony than trying to do that in a different way. And that is, I don't know, do you want a banana? It sounds like bananas are on order at the moment. Let's my amazing children. All right, let's see. So, sometimes I go through all these different modes and none of them quite hit it. Again, some people have a more very, fine-tuned approach to go like, this is going to be an exclusion layer at 23%, and that's going to give me the perfect effect. But I'm just going to kind of go through and find it by flipping through the options. And based on what I've seen so far, I'm probably just going back to multiply, maybe to, no, not color burn, maybe to linear burn. But for now, I think we'll stay multiply for this. And again, if anything, I would just adjust the global color of the layer, maybe making it slightly darker. But I really want to push myself to have this soft touch with this one again. So not leaning into things getting too dark, but this amount of contrast that we see in the original, but not much more than that, which is not my natural inclination. My natural inclination is to really lean into light lights and darker darks, and really try to create a lot of dimensionality that way. But I want to accept the challenge that Lazerwing has thrown forth, and keep it in this more subtle palette, as I keep talking about. All right, so let me just try kind of the same thing with the skull, since it's a slightly different color, that more bonish tan color. Let me just see, if we want to do something different here. Again, like you can immediately see, like going darker creates more dimension. We're going to get there, but we're not going to get there just yet at this stage. All right, and I probably have about 10 more minutes to work on this right now, so we may get another step or so down the road in this session, and then will be to be continued in the next one. So let's see. I think, for now I'm just going to stay, multiply. All right, so what I will do is save, always be saving. And then I'm going to go on from here. One of the things I like about these brushes, again, is it goes from kind of a dot pattern, which the dots are further apart, and so it creates a lighter tone using the exact same color. And also on multiply, one of the things you'll see is it'll multiply and blend these two layers together. But I'll go to kind of the next brush in this group, which has the dots now be closer together, so you can see that then feels darker over the top of what we just did. I'm just going to come down so that I don't name all of my layers, but I do try to keep them pretty well organized. It makes it much easier to find them, especially as you start to, in some cases, have dozens, or in After Effects projects, sometimes hundreds of layers. And in After Effects, I actually do name all of my layers. I'm a little obsessed about keeping that stuff organized because it is such a time saver. And yet I know some phenomenal motion graphics artists that do not care, and it works just fine for them. So there's just never one way to do any of these things. But now that we're getting slightly darker, you'll see I'm also using a smaller brush to be a little more precise now at this stage as well. And I'll also use this kind of lighter touch to, again, sort of feather out, no pun intended that time, some of the shading. So really start to pop when we get some of these lighter colors, playing against these darker colors, darker tones. And then the other thing I am going to do as one of the last steps is take the lines down from being fully black into probably this darker grayish kind of color, and that'll actually help bring everything into a softer tonal range as well. And so, again, what I start to really like about this as it comes together is just the way that this texture starts to overlap that texture, and you get up close and you start to see, right now it kind of feels like thicker dots just getting thinner, which creates that transition. But as we get more things layered up and different blending effects and different colors over the top, this one may not have as much of that because we are staying subtler, but it will still have that kind of impact. And then especially as we go from a dot pattern to something like a line pattern, which will be one of the later stages as well. But already compared to the rest of the body, like I love how that starts to come together. And just, again, when you see it smaller, it's got like a little bit of texture, but you really start to feel like it's just shading. And then when you get in tighter, when you go bigger, you can really see, again, at this early stage, even, what it's actually made of. I just love that. So again, sticking with just the body area for now. I guess it's the full bird. It's just not, should say burb. It's just not the visor or the skull. Those are kind of the two separate areas that we're working with at the moment. Getting a little bit of a highlight area, comparatively into that shoulder, which will help it feel like it's doing a little of that rotation. One of the things I appreciate in doing a few illustrations of Moonbirds, especially in preparation for the Moonbirds comic project, I really appreciate the anatomy and the stylization of that anatomy that initially Justin, who created these Moonbirds characters, and then the rest of the proof art and illustration team on Mythics, like being able to manipulate owl anatomy in a way that gives you ostensibly, especially in the case of Mythics, hands instead of wing tips. That's of course something that we've seen a decent amount of with Disney and things like that, but it's not actually a particularly easy thing to do, to anthropomorphize owls into, use owl anatomy to allow them to do those sorts of things. There's a real trick to that makes it still feel like a wing, but also like something that could pick up a magic wand, let's say, or, a talisman, or let's say an egg. How about an egg? That is something that is well considered and has to kind of be figured out. And I think they are doing an excellent job of that. So now I'm just kind of hitting the side of these feathers that is going to be most in shadow here. And this will be both the edge against the light source coming this way, and then also the shadow that it's casting onto the layer below. And then as we go a little bit further around to the back, I'm going to close this up a little bit so that it has the effect of getting darker as it wraps around the body. Another point of inspiration for this style exploration initially is my love of Into the Spider-Verse, which I continue to just be astonished by the visual approach that they were able to accomplish with that film. And if anyone has seen the trailer for the second one, which is coming up this summer, I'm very excited for that. It looks like they've only been able to go and push that even a lot further, which to me is very exciting. It's one of the things I am truly kind of thrilled about with the state of animation right now is that, when Pixar became so dominant, and rightly so, everyone that followed in 3D animation really kind of adopted the Pixar style, or in many cases it was the cheaper version of the Pixar style. That attempt to make characters that both felt somewhat cartoony and for lack of a better word, animated, but also very realistic rendering, very realistic light and shadow. And I feel like what Spider-Verse did, and you've seen stuff like Mitchell and the Machines, a lot of even this new season of Star Wars Visions, which is out right now, people using CG. Arcana did this amazingly well, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen that. But people using CG and 3D models, but then rendering them in artistic ways, and using painted textures and things like these dot patterns in Spider-Verse that accomplish just a really unique look and not so much going for realism as much as going for a true kind of visual, creative, artistic look for the film, which just isn't something that either was possible before or that was kind of considered. Underrated in that category, I would put a movie called The Bad Guys, which came out maybe 2-3 years ago, and it's fun. It's a fun movie in and of itself, but there's a really unique approach to the style, which blends anime, kind of, especially the human characters have a very anime kind of aesthetic to them, which is very cool. It has a kind of interesting combination of kind of painted and cell shaded and realistic, and the way they bring those elements together just really, really works. So I would recommend that if you haven't seen it, as well as a stylistic feast, as far as another way to kind of interpret what a 3D animation film could look like. And I think kind of sadly, while other studios have been really pushing in that direction, as much as I do love Pixar, and I do, I don't think they've really done that yet. And even looking at something like Elemental, which is coming out this summer, and we'll definitely see it, it still feels pretty true to the quote unquote Pixar style, as opposed to kind of pushing more in that kind of more experimental direction. And I think that's kind of a shame. I hope they'll try something that does go a bit more in that direction. So again, kind of coming in here, getting more towards the back of the wing. I'm gonna bring a little more shadow into it. Still try to capture a little bit of highlight in there. All right, so when I finish this this kind of round of shading, I think that's what I'll have to call it for today, but glad I got to make some more progress on this guy. And Dave, if you're watching or if you see this later, number one, again, appreciate the opportunity to do this for you as a commission. I don't take a lot of commissions, but it's excited to do this one. And number one, thank you. And number two, thank you for your patience as I carve out the time to make this. It's been already a lot of fun, and I dare say I can already tell the end result is going to be really cool. So I excited about that as well. All right, I think that's the wing in Lazerwing, at least at this stage. And let's hit the skull and let's hit the visor, and then I think we'll call it there for today. Let's see, visor, make a new layer above that. I'm gonna zoom in again for that one. And this is going to be largely kind of just going over what I already did, but I still want to get this additional layer in here, especially this under portion here, and then a little bit through here as well. You know, things like the visor, the sheen that it's gonna need to have. You know, that's one of the things that will probably come last, but it will be cool when it's done. All right, and then our Scully friend, going to multiply again, and I'm going to zoom in here a little bit as well. And I'm going to go down in brush size a little because I want to be a little more precise this time around. I'm going to try to get a little bit of kind of the teeth texture in here, just a hint of it. And then thinking about like this way, this kind of gum line is gonna also be shaded, how the teeth are inserted into the skull here. Maybe a little less literal to the way that the nose works. There's, you know, this is actually be more of a, you know, crevice where the cartilage of the nose is all gone, but kind of playing more along the lines of the original here. So taking a little creative license there, but maybe we'll just suggest that as well. You know, although I think we want to actually keep that plane for where light is hitting, so we'll take that out. But definitely the interior of the eye sockets, definitely underneath these cheekbones. And then definitely this is all going to be hit by shadow as the light is coming from the other side and down underneath. Definitely basically the darkest part under here. Auto save is also always a good thing. And we just hit this cheekbone a little bit more. This actually, it's not the. Is that your cheekbone? I guess that is your cheekbone, actually. All of that. Okay. And yeah, I think that is going to be it for today. Oh, you know what I didn't do is the visor. And that is also on this layer. So not quite, almost, but not quite. I did the red part of the visor, but not the visor itself. And now is where I might start to think just a little bit about what the metallic nature of this is. Just a little. So I'm going to make this just a little subtler in here. Give it the beginning of what might be a little bit of a highlight here, as you know, kind of metal tends to have this kind of banding that makes it feel metallic. And then getting the lip of the bottom part of the goggles. Again, I may make this more subtle as well, looking at the color scheme, but I'll come back to those adjustments after we have the majority of just the basics down. All right, there we go. There we go. So I think that's some pretty good progress for, 30, 45 minutes, whatever it's been. All right. So I will try to get back to this over the next couple of days. I'm pretty into it right now, so I wish I had more time to keep going with it at the moment. But alas, I feel like with that skull, it's not too off base to say, alas, poor Yorick. I knew him well. But there is Lazerwing for you so far. And again, Dave, thank you, sir. And lots more to come. So stay tuned, and hopefully you'll tune in again next time. Same owl time, not probably exactly the same time, definitely same owl channel. And with that, join us in our Discord at Macroverse, which is discord.gg/Macroverse. Lots of stuff going on in there. Especially check out the sneak peek channel, where you'll see a lot of bits and pieces from all the various projects that we're working on. You can also download the Macroverse app, which is our next generation comics app, both iOS and Android. We've got a couple of ways to get some free subscriptions, which, come talk to us on Discord. We'll point you in those different directions. And a bunch of new stuff coming out there. I'll also highlight the series that we've been putting out for the last several months, which is an original called Darkland, which is written by the showrunner of Portlandia, art by the amazing Frank Calico. And you can binge all the way up through episode 12 on the app right now, with the final season finale of Darkland hitting this coming Sunday. So I do warn you, the content is mature, but our way of talking about Darkland is Game of Thrones set in hell. So if they could do it on Game of Thrones, our way of thinking about it is we could do it in Darkland in every way that might be thought about. And it's a very cool series. It's a lot of fun. So if you like Game of Thrones and you don't mind manipulative characters in the underworld vying for power, then I think you'll enjoy Darkland. But with that, everyone have a wonderful evening, and I'm going to hit this end stream button, which I never, ever know exactly when the stream ends. So it could just be that